Three, two, one. Welcome to another episode of Third Way Radio. Tonight's topic will be environmental conservation and what us, as a third positionists, would do to solve that problem. Hope everyone enjoyed the Dr. Sunick interview last week. It was a real fun time. Next week's topic will be it'll be on law and order. So stay tuned for that. But tonight we have on the panel Mr. Earl. And Earl is quiet, so we're going to move on to Mr. Apollo.
What's going on?
Yes, and we also have Bumpkin with us today.
Yeah. How's it going? I'm ready to talk about the environment and how we need to save the trees.
Yes, save the trees, not refugees. And we also have Nothing Wrong here in the building.
Hello.
Oh, yes. And who am I forgetting?
Kamiyami,
yes. Kamiyami is also here.
Hello.
He is also existent.
Konnichiwa.
Yes. So that is our lovely panel tonight. We'll get started with the first question of the night. How much of an issue do you guys think climate change is? Let's start with that.
So climate change?
Yes, climate change.
I'm under the impression that the Earth is going in cycles, and pollution is just kind of speeding up the process. That's my interpretation of it.
Well, to what end though? I mean, yes, it's going in cycles. Yes, pollution is speeding up the warming of the climate, but like what's the punchline in there? Because I feel like we're not disagreeing.
The punchline is it's gonna get hot, then it's gonna get really fucking cold. That's my belief. That it's going to get really, really hot, and the Earth is going to counteract this by getting really fucking cold. And it's probably going to send us into like a small another ice age.
But that's not until millions of years into the future, right? I mean,
I wouldn't say so. At the rate that we're speeding up the process, I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say we'd see it in our lifetimes, but
well, okay, so I'd say that in the past we definitely have seen, the glaciers and the polar ice caps kind of reaching down into many areas that we live today. And so those areas became settled as the ice caps melted. But at the same time, I think that we need to look at, instead of looking at such a long term in the future, it's like looking at, for example, looking at the ice cap currently. It grows and it falls back. It grows and it falls back. And this happens, on a cyclical basis. Cyclical basis. But each time it progressively gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so I don't think that even if we do run into this sort of cycle of another ice age, that it's going to be as impactful as we imagine.
I believe it will definitely be impactful. I believe that if nothing changes and we're going in the same route that we're going, a lot of people are going to die. I mean, just even look at how many homeless people are on the streets. Like there's no way they could survive an ice age on the streets. You know what I mean?
Well, it's going to only reach a certain level, right? The cap's only going to extend so far. So much of what we're probably likely going to see is much of upper North America, like Canada will likely be frozen, or at least parts of Canada will be frozen, and then parts of New England.
Hooray.
But I mean, looking at middle to lower United States, it's probably still going to be fine. So you would have to have some sort of resettlement. And I mean, I agree there would be a problem in terms of shifting people's lives out of the way, but I think this is looking way too far into the future. I think that what the pressing matter right now is going to be is really trying to address the issues that we're facing today and that are only going to be exacerbated before we even hit this cycle.
The sad thing about it is, though, that the U.S. doesn't even really pollute that much.
But it's not just pollution; it's habitat destruction. It's
yeah.
I mean, it all falls into place. So, I mean, and that's always the problem when it comes to politics is there's so much focus on carbon and how much pollutants we're releasing into the atmosphere,
Right.
but we're also polluting our waters, which then pollutes our fish, which then pollutes our wildlife. And we we need pollinators, we need different sorts of wildlife to survive. But also I think that we as humans, as the higher species, should be stewards of the land and should be looking to protect the biodiversity of the planet. So it's twofold, it's survival and like really
Yeah, you don't
having
want to
something.
destroy. You don't want to
Right.
destroy your surroundings, your inhabitants, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that actually leads
I
in.
agree.
Oh, go ahead, Miss Nothing Wrong.
I was just going to say, I mean, even if you don't have the higher uh, ethical obligations in your heart, about protecting things like biodiversity and being a steward of the earth, then you should at least be concerned with the very practical reality of the fact that it's going to impact your life in a very real way. This habitat destruction, even if you don't care for the beauty and all that of the natural world, I mean, it's going to impact your life in a way that is transformative and overwhelmingly negative. So, I mean, it is of concern to absolutely everyone, I would say.
And that actually leads us into our next question. Why do you guys think that protecting the environment is so important?
You don't want to destroy. Go ahead, Kami.
First of all, we live in the environment. So if we destroy it, you don't have any place to live. It's like burning your own house down. It's suicidal. And, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I mean, it will impact your ability to survive. I mean, we talk about, glaciers freezing over Canada. I mean, even more to the point, I mean, our world is structured in a way that if you change things on a very minute scale, it has far-reaching and disastrous consequences, right? I mean, even well before an ice age, there would be all sorts of crop failures. I mean, just overnight, really, you would have disease and famine and wars breaking out over just things today that are unthinkable, right? So the environment is of undoubtable importance. The question always comes down to like what are the issues and what is causing them. Less, I think most people can agree that it's important. It's just to what degree are we able to have an impact on that, and to what degree is it out of our control.
Like I was gonna say, the sad part about it is, you can really only enforce this stuff country to country, right? So we can only really fix like the U.S., right? We can't really make China fix their problems. I mean, I don't even know how we would even go about incentivizing they do that.
We could, because they make all of our cheap crap, so we could just stop buying that cheap crap. Could be one way.
There's always military force.
That's a bad idea.
It's true. It is one of the few advantages, and one of the very, very few advantages of the kind of globalized economy that we live in the post-World War II era, is that there are options outside of military intervention. For instance, it wouldn't, be important whatsoever that no one buys shoes made in China 50 years ago, but now that could, in theory, have a very real impact, that you can have these other incentives and disincentives by which you can motivate a country to do things that it wouldn't ordinarily want to do.
But at the same time, why wouldn't they just lie? At the end of the day, why wouldn't they just lie and say they reduce?
Systems are not perfect, but one thing that has one of the more recent developments in the kind of like global political system is this idea of methods other than straight military intervention. There's kind of been new options that are on the table, so you can, in a way, influence a country and make China, for instance, cut down on their emissions and stuff without having to come to a brutal war.
And I think that although we are very much against global finance, I think that there still is it still is a good idea to have something like the UN or NATO from an environmental perspective that is kind of like the countries getting together to come up with a plan. like the resistance against the Paris Accord, the 2050 Paris Accord, among people who supported Trump and many Republicans, to me seems so ridiculous, because while I understand how politicized things have become and how aggressive it is, there's no reason why we can't have some sort of goal that we can try to achieve. But I think that at the same time, we do have to think about jobs, we have to think about people, and we have to make sure we have something that's realistic. But there's no reason why we can't do that. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the question at hand, I think that why it's so important. I mean, it's like what we said before. It's like our survival itself depends on the environment. There's so much that goes into the ecosystem. You remove one insect, it can completely backfire on an entire ecosystem. And there's so much that, I mean, plants, for example, we use in our medicines. We use plants in our textiles, production. I mean, various types of things. And, it's just like all of this goes into pretty much our daily lives, and we don't even think about it.
Okay, good takes, all of you. Good takes. Who do you think is primarily responsible for environmental destruction and climate change? Like, not just like corporations, but who do you think that we should put the most blame on?
I would say the industrial and the finance capitalists, especially the big international ones.
Definitely.
I would argue it's a problem with the kind of diffusion of responsibility that we have in our modern political systems. Whereas in the past, you would have a state that would take responsibility, for the actions that it takes. When the consequences are realized, the responsibility falls on someone. But now we have corporations and whatnot who have this diffusion of responsibility across a whole nation. And so, I mean, one company trashes the river outside of the factory or whatever, and everyone suffers the consequences, but no one suffers the responsibility. And so, I mean, maybe somebody goes to jail, maybe someone loses their job, but at the end of the day, we all suffer the consequences, and no one really has to deal with the aftermath in a responsible sense. So I would argue that, I mean, you could say corporations, you could say politicians, you could say finance capitalists, industrialists, or anything, but really it's the sense of that there's no responsibility for the actions that we take in our, at least in our American society, but I would argue all the world over.
Yeah, everybody can play a part in this, and there's so much that you can do in your own backyard, and so much that we do that is harming the environment that we don't even realize. Some of our practices on a more local level, that in terms of putting the blame, I think it is best to redirect that into bringing together a mindset of environmentalism and environmental conservation.
True. They spend a lot of money offsetting the responsibility just to the consumer as opposed to themselves.
Very true.
But really, it's everyone's responsibility because we all live in the environment.
Very, very, very insightful takes from everyone. Bumpkin, do you want to say anything?
I don't have anything to say. I agree.
Yes, you agree? Okay. So, moving on to our next question. This is a bit more of a juicier one. What are some of the things that a third position government could do to tackle climate change and environmental destruction? Or destruction of habitat?
If a corporation does it, tax the fuck out of them.
Okay, that's one thing.
Ooh, right,
well, make incentives for companies to want to have green practices.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the carrot and the stick.
Yes.
But there definitely needs to be more action taken against people like developers, for example. Habitat destruction, like I think I said before, is such a, it's such a big thing.
And there needs to be more focus, in my opinion, on I mean, the system that we have, it's always just such a slap on the wrist, right? Maybe it's a fine that, it really, in the grand scheme of many corporations, is just you know, a minor some pocket change, right? You fined, and you have these disastrous consequences, but no one ever has to have any responsibility in it. But if you had a state that would crack down, and I mean, on these deliberately and knowingly unethical practices. Nothing off the top of my head, but people need to go to jail for these kinds of things. People need to know that there's consequences that extend beyond the pocketbook, and it falls to the government to take action and make an example. I mean, I hate to use the crime and punishment, dichotomy, but I mean, I think that's important when it comes to the environment, because it's always going to be convenient to trash the environment in the short term. That's when you don't have to deal with the consequences in the long term. So these are things that they need to be harshly penalized, and I think that that's something that falls to the government.
One of the things that some states do in terms of homeowners is if you live near a conservation land or if you live on a wetland, there are very strict regulations about what you can do with that land. And so these are things that are already kind of happening, but we just need to take some of the things that are happening more at the local level and bring them to more national kind of awareness.
Good takes on that. We've had this. I know we've had this argument in private before, but which do you think should take precedent when we're looking at like protecting the environment and everything? Should technological development take precedent and eventually space exploration, or should we focus on protecting our environment here at home?
I think that protecting our environment can be the new frontier. I mean, we can look at just all of the different types of technologies and different types of practices that we can put in to protecting nature and understanding more about how it works as sort of its own, like its own kind of area that you can kind of reach into and dive into. And also, I think that we look at technology. I mean, how much more do we need to develop in regards to technology? Now, I think that a lot of our focus now is in like things that are not as important. I mean, phones, computers, things that haven't really made our lives any better. So I definitely don't disagree that there should be some focus in kind of like the medical fields and areas like that can actually help people. But I think that getting our minds out of continuously industrializing and continuously progressing into this technocratic kind of society is something that we need to kind of step back from.
I completely agree.
Okay. Good.
Sorry.
Good take. I guess on that note of like continuously industrializing technological advancement, I know like what is like, I guess this is more a question for Apollo, but what is your opinion on like GMOs and stuff, right? And how could they be used to like help protect our environment or bring back existing or bring back endangered species or whatever?
Well, I think that genetic modification can be utilized for, one of the examples being the American chestnut. And so it's like the American chestnut has been eradicated from basically all of our ecosystems. It grows from its stump, and then at a certain point it matures, and then it gets hit by the blight, and then it dies back again. So it hasn't necessarily been killed completely, but many of the trees have died. So what they've done is they've mixed the American chestnut with the Chinese chestnut, which is resistant to this blight, and they formed kind of a new tree that's 95% American chestnut and has the gene that is in it to resist that. So fundamentally, it's that plant. So I mean, initiatives like that can definitely be used when it comes to genetic modification, but I definitely disagree with these sorts of practices being done with our food and agriculture. I think that it depletes a lot of the nutrition from it, and I think that we need to be fully conscious of what we're doing when it comes to edible products.
Why do GMOs have any more profound impact on soil depletion than non-modified plants? That's something. This is the first time I've ever heard of that argument.
I don't think I said anything about soil depletion.
I thought you. I'm sorry, I might have misheard you.
You said nutrition.
I would argue that GMOs can very possibly be a wonderful step forward in our kind of relationship with the environment. The problem is we have this where the profit is always held as the most important virtue to strive for. So in their strive, in their quest for to more sales, to open up to new markets, we have the exploration of GMOs and modifying foods in certain ways, but without concerns for the other things that are also influenced by that as well. So whereas they're always going to want to sell the most profitable strain of corn, for instance, there needs to have the government step in and regulate certain elements of it that almost like a tree that must be pruned. I mean, if the tree starts growing in directions that are harmful, if you have the GMO exploration going into ways that are harmful for natural indigenous plants in a region, for instance, or have some kind of impact on the environment that is unforeseen or whatever, we need to have the government step in and regulate this. And I think GMOs can be a very real and very important thing in the future. There just needs to be more focus on slowing it down and understanding the direction in which we're moving so that we can prevent these kinds of problems. But I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with the idea. I think it is the future. And I mean, humans have been modifying the world around us since antiquity, and I mean, I think this is just the next step in that evolution.
Like dogs, yeah.
I really prefer non-GMO foods, man. I don't know.
Well, I think the issue is like what Nothing Wrong said. It's the GMOs has been targeted in terms of producing the biggest tomato or the biggest plants and not looking at kind of the nutritional benefits of these. But it's also been directed at pesticide use as well, because a lot of bigger farms just basically blow pesticides all over their plants. And so they need plants that are resistant to the many problems that are encountered by something like that.
Right.
So it's directing that energy into something good, which I'm receptive to, but I understand where you're coming from, where I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to these sorts of things. Like, yes, many of our modern vegetables were created because we've crossed different types of plants over and over again to make those vegetables in the way they are now. But I think GMOs is a completely different sort of look at things.
When you were talking about the chestnuts, is it possible that we could do that with like animal breeds and stuff?
Yeah, that happens. Even today. I don't have an example off the top of my head, but yeah, there are, for instance, certain kinds of dogs that are crossbred to be more able to survive different kind of climates. I mean, I remember in the back of my mind some story of this, breed of dog that either came from Siberia or went to Siberia, and then it made a more healthy or more hardy breed of dog. For instance, I know that there's things done with like cows in different climates and breeding them with cows from like India, for instance, to make them more resistant to tropical weather, so that you can have dairy farms in, namely Cuba, but places in South America, when ordinarily the European dairy cow isn't a big fan of the tropical weather. So yes, you see this phenomena in livestock as well. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting subject there. On to, I guess, the next question, if we're all summed up with that. Yes. To what extent does human interference affect animals in the wild, and how would a third position government deal with like habitat destruction and stuff? I guess a good example of this would be the border wall. Obviously, that's a major problem with like animal migration, especially in like the California Sinaloa area on the west coast.
They'll go around.
They'll go around. They'll swim. They'll learn to swim.
One instance in history that was definitely impacted by human interference was the Dust Bowl. You had a huge migration of different types of livestock that were just grazing and grazing on many of these plants, and they couldn't quite recover in time in order to kind of replenish its root systems. And a lot of these grasses in the prairies have such deep roots that was what was really keeping a lot of the soil itself alive. So that was kind of one instance in history where we didn't fully understand what we were doing in terms of bringing agriculture to this kind of high prairie site, and we just completely destroyed the natural ecosystems that were there, and we weren't able to produce food because of it.
Potentially even worse, I would argue.
We also completely almost completely genocided buffaloes as well. I mean,
absolutely, yeah. But I mean, people have known about soil depletion. I'm sorry. What is it? What you're talking about? How with no plants in the soil, and it creates this kind of loose dirt that flies around in the atmosphere. People were well aware of that in the 20s. I think the bigger argument is that we didn't care. That it was hubris, in the pursuit of a short-term material gain. So I mean, you could argue for ignorance, but I think that I wouldn't even give them that benefit of the doubt.
Pride and profit.
Yeah, and I think just the us versus them kind of mentality is something that we see as well. Like, nature is always so removed from who we are as a people.
It's true. Yeah. It's always somebody else's problem when it's nature, right?
Yeah.
So that's the mindset that is so unhealthy that we have to work on and change. That we have to realize it has a very direct impact on you yourself, and that you yourself can take steps to put things in the right direction.
Yeah, and the border wall, like we were talking about, would certainly affect migrations of different types of animals, and we have to look at spaces in a completely different light. I mean, we have to look at state and national borders, but we also have to make room for these different ecoregions that transcend beyond that, and figure out some sort of plan. So there's no way in the future, as we've kind of been hinting on, is like, we're not going to become this isolationist utopia in the future. We have to work with other countries. We have to establish friendly relationships with those that we can, because the environment is such a global topic and such a global impact that whatever happens anywhere else is gonna happen to us. It's gonna affect us. So we basically need a third positionist global society.
Yes.
Huh?
Very, I guess, based and globalist pilled or eco pilled. I don't know. Yes, on I guess if everyone's done with that question, we can move on to the next or our final question of the night. How do you guys think that urbanization and a modern industrial society has affected the environment and human living standards?
Oh, fuck. Straight out of Ted Kaczynski's book.
Yeah, straight out of Ted Kaczynski. Well, you should love this question because you live in a Ted Kaczynski shack.
Yeah, I've read Uncle Ted. Is it bad to refer to him as Uncle Ted?
Yeah. No, we he's our second uncle. He's our other uncle,
He did kill people, right? Yeah, he did kill people.
So did the other uncle, but we still love him.
Well,
he did in the war. Guys. We know he got 3 confirmed kills in the war, so.
Oh, true, yeah.
Yeah. So
what are we talking about? Oh, yeah.
What were you saying, Paula?
Oh, I was just joking that I think we're more Walden, Emerson, Thoreau guys.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can go with that.
Yeah, but
urbanization,
industrial society, and how it has had detrimental, irreversible effects on the environment and people in general. Humans have basically formed these super PACs, right? Or these super huge groups of people, right? Cities and all that. Where we used to be, we used to have more of a pack mentality, right? We used to have small circles. Now we have huge circles, right? We've
gone from a pack to a herd, as it were, and it's a very different psychological.
Yes, definitely. I mean, have you guys ever heard of the what's that rat experiment?
Yeah, the nymph, not the secret nymph, sorry, but the rat utopia experiments in
The rat
the.
utopia experiments. Yeah, I'll just
No,
explain it to
that
the
stuff's creepy.
audience. The utopian rat experiment was they gave one tribe of rats, right? They gave one small little group of rats enough so much space, infinite food, water, and all that. It was a utopia. And what happened instantly is the population boomed, right? They were having sex like no other, like rats do, right? And like people do too. Funny enough.
Fun enough.
Funny enough, but yeah, the population boomed. But then they started to run out of space, and that's when problems started happening. That's when you started to see a change in how the societal or how the rat society was operating, right? One of the more common things was there were young males in the society that would isolate themselves from the rest of the rats. They wouldn't reproduce.
Are you talking about rat incels?
There were rat incels, yes. There were also highly feminized male rats.
There were also tranny rats. Wow,
Yes.
That's dead serious. Like, it sounds like a joke, but I mean,
it's not a joke.
There were incel rats. There were
it's genuinely
profound impacts on the way they express sexuality and the way their herd mentality changed and grew. And there's a lot of parallels to what we see in urban environments that we don't see in rural environments. And I mean,
yes.
Is it correlation or causation or whatever? But we see that similar to cities that we saw that as the population grew closer to capacity, that there was like increases in random acts of violence between rats that organized themselves into different kind of categories. We see, like you said, incel, for lack of a better word, incel rats, and then these kind of like hyper alpha rats who would like.
Yes, the biggest thing that surprised me, right, which we haven't reached this level yet, and I hope we never do, but the hyper violent male rats eventually preferred the feminine male rats.
Yeah,
and
all sorts of.
They stopped reproducing with the women rats, and then that's when the rat colony just died out.
And they all would die, yeah. And when they reached a certain capacity, they call them hives or colonies or whatever, would go extinct. They would reach a capacity, and then the rats would die in a couple of generations, and there would be no rats.
None.
So, I highly recommend some YouTube videos on it. I'm trying to look for one, but it seems to be gone. They're called the Rat Utopia experiments, and they will definitely.
I mean, they didn't mistreat the rats or anything.
Yeah, the arguments could be made, but you're right. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Something
I'll find it. Give it to me, and if you find it, give it to me, and I'll pop it up in the description. That sounds interesting. Yeah, that sounds very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of hard to make through.
It was a big topic in the political arena in, I believe, the 20s or 30s. There was this research had just come out, I believe, and there was a lot of course, that coincides with the rapid urbanization of America and a lot of the world. So there was these really profound discussions in the American political sphere about the ramifications of these experiments and what they could mean for us. So it's quite interesting. Oh, yeah. Though I would argue it is all pretty tangentially related.
Well, yeah, making the correlation between rats and humans. Obviously, humans are more intelligent than rats, but there can be correlations on how, on the pack mentality, the tribalism, and all that. Absolutely. So I mean, I'm sure if there was a wolf experiment, right? I'm sure there would be definitely some similar outcomes. It's just easier to use rats because rats are smaller, right?
So how do we find balance between industrialization and nature? Because, I mean, as much as I would love to, basically revert ourselves back to living on a rural plantation and, living off the land and everything that kind of Henry David Thoreau sort of talked about as he wanted to revolt against the coming industrialization in the 1800s. I just don't think that. First, I don't think that we can survive like that because we've become so accustomed to the way things are in our industrial society, and I think that it's just like if we do drop out like that, we're not going to be able to compete with the rest of the world.
So yeah, I do agree. The question is, how does one strike a balance between these? But I think that there's also an argument to be made. At what point does competing with the rest of the world become more important than a healthy and many would argue more fulfilling way of life? So like, at what point does needing to compete with China become more of a concern than other things, for instance?
I think that one of the big issues is just being overpowered by a stronger military force.
I would say agree that that's the most important concern.
That's kind of the biggest problem is if we don't compete with the rest of the world, it's just gonna be so easy for other countries to be able to conquer us.
And they will in a heartbeat.
Absolutely. Especially, I mean, one of the only pushbacks to that is the kind of a mature democracy theory, where they say that democracies don't want to go to war with one another because it's economically in neither one's interest, right? But if you don't, I would agree. But the point is, if you don't compete, as it were, like if you revert back to for instance, an 18th century manorialist model, then China, for instance, would have no reason to not go to war. I mean, if we're not providing them with goods and services and labor and whatnot, then why would they keep us around when they could, like you said, just come in and take our resources? So I mean, yeah, it really all comes down to, can you defend yourself against the interests of others? So
let's talk about space. We need to go to space.
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, the German barbarians could only hold off the Roman Empire for so long.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
Are there German barbarians in space? That's the real question.
We're not doing this.
There could have been.
We're not doing this.
We had that chance. And we blew it.
Yeah, intergalactic pagan supremacy. Anyone? If any of you watch Dave Martell, then you get that joke.
By Allah, I will give you my shoe.
Oh God.
Pagan supremacy.
Pagan supremacy. I know.
That's
God. No, seriously though, and in all serious note, we wouldn't have a population problem if we would just spread across and start terraforming planets.
Yeah.
We really would.
Well, that's not necessarily true. I mean, you could still, the problem of overpopulation isn't necessarily a land problem. It is a how you go about procreating problem, right? It's like if you had 5 Earths, you could still overpopulate all 5 of them, and there are a finite number of planets that we can get to. I mean, you can't really hop galaxies even without some sort of kind of technology that is almost incomprehensible, right? But so say we have the entire galaxy at our disposal. I mean, with this kind of unchecked model of procreate at will that we have, there will become a time that even that becomes overpopulated. So that's really just kicking the can down the road, right? It's like, yes, it would be a huge step forward in the problem of dealing with overpopulation, but you haven't rooted out the fundamental problem, which is irresponsible procreation, right?
Yes. Well, we saw it in North America. I mean,
exactly. That's a great point. Yeah, great point.
But yes,
in North America,
very elegant point.
Yeah, I guess that's everything we wanted to say on environmental conservation and climate change.
Are we wrapping up?
Is that?
Because I've got a fun space question that's not really related.
Okay, fine. And ask your other question.
So here we go. We colonize Mars. It's the first planet that humans make it to. Under what laws? Like what country is it? Like, is it independent of Earth laws? Do we kind of hold over our ethical and legal sets that we take from Earth and bring it to Mars? Do we start afresh?
I would
Do
say
we
what
have
I
a
would
Martian
s-
separatist?
My
I would say-
understanding of how that would work is it would probably be like the American colonies, where it would officially be under, or not the American colonies, the what is it?
British colonies in America?
No, not the British colonies. It wasn't the British ones. It was another. I can't remember the colonies. Actually, might have been the Portuguese colonies. I don't know. No, it was India. Yeah, it was Dutch India. Where they would fly the flag, right? But they wouldn't abide by any of the laws. They would have their own completely separate legal system.
Or it would just be whatever legal system it would be whatever country got there first. It would go by their legal system.
Yeah, I think it would be run by like SpaceX would have SpaceX would be the administrative body, and it would be officially an American colony, but it would operate under completely different laws.
Go to the strongest.
Same as the Dutch India.
We're okay. We're not even considering if it's not SpaceX and it's the military funding that gets us there, right?
I would imagine it will be private investment that gets us there at this point.
At this point, it would
yeah, it's probably going to be private. If it was government, then it would probably just be a repeat of the American colonies.
It would be American colony, but it'd be a colony of America.
So if it's private, then we can almost I guess we would hope that it's a meritocracy, right? It would be the very smartest, the very most capable, and then also the very richest who would buy a ticket or whatever. But you would have Mars be colonized by this kind of technocratic, highly sophisticated group of people, and then they're going to create a society on Mars. They're not going to want Earthlings. I mean, why would you want low IQ Earthlings going to Mars and ruining your based Martian ethno state?
Are you repeating the plot of Call of Duty Infinite Warfare?
Oh, I have no idea.
That's literally the plot of Infinite Warfare. Is the Mars colonies decide to break off
really? I had no
from
idea.
the Earth government?
It's something I was thinking of the other day. It's like it wouldn't help overpopulation because they wouldn't let any humans in. They'd build a wall.
This sounds like great.
Build a wall.
Building an entire globe around our globe.
The Dyson sphere, like you've never seen.
I'm Mars Trump.
Mars Trump.
Okay, yeah. He's red instead of orange. Okay, that's it. That's that episode.
Yeah. Let's talk about.
Thank you so much for watching. This has been Third Way Radio. Stay tuned because next week's episode we're gonna be having Culture Thug on. Actually, no, not next week's episode. The week after. First episode of November will be about the election. We'll be having Culture Thug on, so stay tuned for that. Next week's episode will be about Law and Order. You guys should definitely set a reminder for that. I've already got it up there. And yeah, until next time, guys. Godspeed.